Sovereign sister, if your mind is always scanning, worrying, bracing for the worst, expecting the worst things to happen, it's not just anxiety. In Kundalini Yoga, we call this the negative mind that is in overdrive. But there's nothing negative about your negative mind. In fact, a healthy negative mind protects you. A healthy negative mind uses discernment. A healthy negative mind sees the red flags. The thing is that when you've been through trauma, the negative mind then turns everyday moments into danger and then turns you into the problem. So today we're going to connect two very important things that restore sovereignty very fast for a first-time generational cycle breaker. How the negative mind gets distorted by generational trauma and stress biology, and how guilt distorts perception, impacting the negative mind, and why Jesus Christ in A Course in Miracles is very clear that guilt is not guidance. Because when your protector is distorted and guilt is in the driver's seat, you don't lose clarity. You lose access to your soul led authority, which is your intuition. Now, for a first time cycle breaker, sovereignty is not just a vibe, it's a nervous system reality. Because your lineage didn't just pass down stories, it passed down protective programming. And the program, a lot of times, sounds like you gotta stay on guard, expect the worst, don't trust anyone. If you relax, you're gonna pay for it. So you can be building a much better life and still feel like something bad is about to happen. And I promise you that it is not a character flaw. It is an alarm system that has never been turned off. And if you don't retrain this alarm system, it's going to do three things. It's going to steal your present moment, which impacts all aspects of your life, your health, your ability to co create with God and materialize the beautiful life that you're here to co create. It turns relationships into courtrooms because you're constantly going to see the partner as the problem because of the pain that you carry, especially when it comes to guilt and the negative mind. It's so heavy that you cannot carry it, so you project it out into all of your relationships. And it also turns your identity into a survival role, meaning you don't have vitality and nervous system capacity to create because you're living day to day just trying to figure out how to survive. And it may even be that there is no danger in front of you. It's something that has been pre-wired in the nervous system and the brain that's affecting the negative mind that makes you feel like there's constant danger. So this episode is how we stop doing this. Well, today we're going to cover exactly the Kundalini Yoga map of the 10 bodies and the three aspects of the mind: negative, positive, neutral, with the focus on the negative mind. We're going to look at what the negative mind is meant to do versus how patterns of generational trauma distort it. Because guess what? The negative mind is a very powerful tool. We just need to know how to use it. We're also going to look at the brain science of stress and why clarity and intuition disappear, explained in a way that you can really relate it to your day to day life so you no longer are disconnected from that inner voice. We're going to look at how guilt keeps this alarm on from generation to generation and generation, and how negativity becomes a self feeding loop. We're also going to look at A Course in Miracles, Jesus Christ's correction, guilt as a state versus feeling, and the continuum from false guiltlessness to true guiltlessness. And this has nothing to do with religion, it has everything to do with the highest teachings of Jesus Christ. And lastly, we're going to look at how forgiveness actually restores perception so God led guidance becomes clear again, so that your negative mind becomes fortified by you remembering who you truly are. So, welcome back, Sovereign Sister, to the Sovereign Sister Movement Podcast. I am Veronica Barragan, trauma informed Kundalini Yoga therapist, the founder of the Sovereign Sister Sanctuary and Movement for first time generational cycle breakers like you, learning how to reclaim their sovereignty, body, mind, and spirit through rewiring of the nervous system and brain so that inherited survival stops getting passed down and we lead instead with God led self authority for 7 generations before and after us. So let's get into it because today's podcast episode is one that I'm very excited to share with you all because as a cycle breaker myself, the negative mind was something that I obviously struggled with a lot. And a lot of this has to do obviously with the physiology of the nervous system and the brain. But we also have to look at the spiritual component because once I understood and merged both, that's when I was able to really understand how powerful my mind is and how to rewire it and train it instead of it using me as a slave. Because it's usually what happens when we're not trained as children how to actually train the mind. So before we get into the actual teachings of the negative mind and how this is correlated with paranoia, worry, and constantly feeling like something bad is going to happen. First, we have to understand the quick map of the 10 energetic bodies. So, recently, I did a podcast episode on the subtle anatomy of who you are. In it, and I'll link it below, or you can find it here on my podcast episode. We talked about all the 10 layers that you are. You're not just a physical body. In fact, everything in this world is energy. So you are energy. And within that energy field, there are 10 layers of who you are. You have 10 bodies. Kundalini Yoga is the perfect science of energy. And the beauty of Kundalini Yoga is that it is very precise and there are specific meditations and kriyas. Kriyas is like specific breathing, movement with the hands, with the body that you do to get a specific alchemical result in the body, in the mind, and the spirit. So we understand in Kundalini Yoga there are specific meditations for each of these layers of who you are. And these 10 bodies are 10 parts of your systems that work together. So today we're not going to talk about all 10 of them, but the entire point is that your identity is not one thing, it's an entire system. It's sacred geometry. It's a beautiful temple that many of us have to rebuild because of the storms of trauma. And so inside of this system, there are actually three aspects of your mind. Your mind is very powerful. However, there are three aspects that we can train individually to really use and activate the power of the mind. Jogi Bhajan, who brought Kundalini Yoga from the east to the west, said that we have the fastest and most wonderful power, our own mind. It can take us to God, he says. It can take us to ourselves. It can take us deep into ourselves or far out into the universe. When clean, he says, and open, the mind can do anything that we want. The problem here is that no one ever taught us how to train the mind. So most of us are slaves to the mind. We're actually very scared of the mind. We don't understand how to control it. And so then the mind controls us. Why? Because we don't clean it. You have to take out the garbage from the subconscious mind every single day from layers and layers and layers of generational programming, religious programming, societal programming. So if you're not taking out the garbage and cleaning it out, that's why there's a pileup of junk in there. And that's why instead of it being your biggest ally, it is your biggest enemy. A lot of people say heart over mind. I don't agree with that. I believe it's heart and mind. Yes, your heart is very powerful. It's its own brain in itself. But in the heart is where we feel to materialize. The heart is the essence, right? But the mind is just as powerful. The mind is not your enemy. We just make it our enemy because most people have lived under chronic stress for so long because of trauma that it literally feels like the mind is their enemy because of all the horrible talk that happens within the mind, right? So within the mind, in Kundalini Yoga, we know that there are three aspects of the mind. There is what is known as the negative mind, which there's nothing negative about your negative mind. It is your protector. It checks risks. It understands if there's a red flag, so you're not gullible. So the problem here is when we experience trauma, it turns into the worrier, and we're going to get into that next. The second part of the mind itself is known as the positive mind. And the positive mind is all about possibilities. It sees opportunities. But an unhealthy positive mind, which we're going to talk about next week, is very gullible, taken advantage of, and pretty much not grounded. We also have the third aspect of the mind, and this is what a yogi actually is. A yogi is not somebody that can bend their bodies left and right. A yogi is somebody that can operate from what is known as the neutral mind, which is basically this is wisdom. It's the ability to be able to make decisions without judgment. It's the ability to see clearly. It's the ability to not choose from the programming. the ego, the trauma. So the neutral mind is what we develop when we have all three aspects of the mind that are super healthy. And someone who's balanced in the mind uses all three. And we do that through Kundalini Yoga meditation. However, somebody who has experienced trauma and hasn't done any type of inner work to change the brain, to change the nervous system, which changes the mind, to take out the garbage, guess what happens? You're going to get stuck in one of those, and you're not only going to get stuck in one of those, but you're going to be working with the shadow aspect of all three of them. So the negative mind becomes paranoia. The positive mind becomes being gullible and taken advantage of. The neutral mind becomes judgmental and making choices from a program, from your own trauma instead of what the truth is. So most cycle breakers actually get stuck the most in the negative mind overdrive. Why? Because remember how we were talking about the brain, and we're going to get into that today? It becomes hypervigilant. So it's constantly always worried. And that has to do with how your lineage basically has trained you through the nervous system to live in survival. And again, we're not blaming our lineage, right? Like the things that they went through, especially, I feel like everybody who incarnates into these bodies, we incarnate as patients. We're here, our sole purpose is actually to look at this traumatic experience, look at our Judas, and be liberated through them. So we don't have to keep repeating the same pattern, right? But we have to understand that our ancestors went through so many different things. It wasn't just the trauma that happened within the family. There was colonization, there was war, there were so many other things like religious programming that impacted them where they felt not safe in their own bodies, and because of that, they couldn't create. They had to learn how to survive the day. So we're not trying to like get rid of your negative mind. We're trying to heal so that it serves you instead of being your enemy. And so what is the negative mind? Well, a healthy negative mind does the following. You see a red flag and it helps you pause. It helps you not move into it. So for example, like even like something as not so serious as you trying to cross the street. Let's say you're trying to cross the street. There's a bazillion cars coming. They're going 100 miles per hour or 60 miles per hour because they can't go 100, right? And what happens? Your negative mind says, don't cross the street. An unhealthy negative mind will be like, just cross the street and you'll figure it out. The other thing about the negative mind, when it's healthy, you can say no and not feel guilty. A lot of cycle breakers struggle with using no because of the fact that they want to be people pleasers, because that's what they were raised through that programming since they were kids. A healthy negative mind honors herself as a woman and says no and then doesn't even feel guilty about that. A healthy negative mind also notices patterns. A lot of cycle breakers, because their brains turn into hypervigilant mode, constantly scanning. To me, that's a superpower. But most cycle breakers, they struggle with that because they are constantly scanning, but it's because they're paranoid because they can't trust. So you have to learn to channel energy. That's what Kundalini Yoga meditation is all about, because you can actually turn this paranoia into a gift, and you can learn to be present enough in your body so that, yeah, you'll recognize the patterns, but you won't take and absorb other people's negativity or emotions or pain. You can truly sit in the stage of consciousness like a bodhisattva, compassionate because you sat through your own pain, but not taking on anyone else's pain. And taking on anyone else's pain is not gonna help them or you. That the reason why we do that is because our nervous systems are so hijacked, and the negative mind goes on overdrive and starts to tell you, oh, you need to save them, you need to save them. First, everybody that comes to you with the problem, they come to you with the need to just be seen. They don't need you to solve it. They don't need you to talk it out. If you can be present because your nervous system is stable and your negative mind is not in overdrive, that presence is healing, because now the person is not being seen through the eyes of being broken or through the eyes of feeling sorry for them, and they can feel and sense that. So a healthy negative mind can notice all these patterns and all these different things, but can sit with that person without taking on that energy, and also without being paranoid about if the person is also showing their darkness, right? The other thing about a healthy negative mind is that they're very conscious about their needs as a woman. protecting, the time, not putting other people first, and understanding that when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And without us having a healthy negative mind, we are very much just helping everyone and not really honoring our own needs, which is why it goes back to saying no without guilt. Healthy negative mind sounds like slow down, or you know what, check the facts before you move forward. That's not paranoia. That's just like, hey, slow down, check the facts, or maybe that doesn't feel safe, or we're not doing that again. Remember, one of the things that we rebuild through Kundalini Yoga therapy is introception. We talked about that in the last podcast episode. When you've been through trauma because your nervous system gets hijacked and your brain gets hijacked through all these hormones and programming, you basically are not able to even feel the sensations of your body. And introception is literally like our sixth sense, where as you develop your Kundalini Yoga meditation practice, not only do you become aware of the sensations, but you can actually translate them. And that is also a very healthy negative mind, where the body can be telling you these things like, oh, that doesn't feel fit safe, but you're not seeing it as a something to be worried or scared about. You're simply acknowledging and then moving forward with whatever it is that you need to do. Now, here's the trauma distortion that impacts this negative mind so that it turns into a distortion. And instead of protecting you, it turns very like paranoid and also worried all the time. The negative mind literally occupies you. You become its slave. And the thing is that it's not doing this to hurt you. It's just a program. That's what it's been programmed to do. It's the same thing with all of the systems. You know how we did those podcast episodes where we looked at the endocrine system and the impact of generational trauma. We looked at the reproductive system, the circulatory system. We looked at the respiratory system. And all those systems are there to repair you. Something happens, they go and do their work, they repair you. But when you've experienced trauma and then you've lived under that trauma, which creates chronic stress and complex post traumatic stress, it doesn't protect you. All these systems don't protect you. They think they have to defend you because that's what the nervous system and brain are basically stuck on. So instead of repairing you, your immune system defends you and then you get an autoimmune disease. Same thing with the negative mind. Instead of doing its job of protecting you, it occupies you and it becomes a constant inner narrator that feeds on fear. It doesn't just warn you, it literally runs your entire life. Most people, they don't even realize, but 95% of the day, they're just running on a program. It's a subconscious program that they're not even realize. It's kind of like, when you drive, if you've been driving for a long time, of course, when you first started driving, it was so beautiful and novel and everything was brand new. But after you've been driving for some time, it just turns into like an automatic thing that you do. That is what most people's days look like. And that is what it also correlates to a distorted negative mind. Because a distorted negative mind sounds like, oh my God, something bad is coming. And you're like on vacation. You're like sitting in front of the beach, enjoying the view, but you're like, when is that other shoe gonna drop? The other thing is things like don't relax. If you need to stay productive, or somebody like gives you this look, or somebody posts something on the social media platforms, and what do you say? Oh, they're mad, or they're talking about me, or you have like a deep fear of just being rejected, or if you say no again, that you're gonna lose love and approval. Or a lot of the negative mind distortions also have to do with the fact that if you're seen in your authentic light, you feel like you're going to be punished. And this goes back to even a lot of witches' wounds, where many of our grandmothers and mothers even were incredible healers. And because society would not allow them to use their gifts, religion, so sad. And especially where I come from in Michoacan, the Purepecha people were incredible healers and used herbs and all these different things, energies to heal. And yet, when colonization came, they no longer were allowed to use those practices. And so, because of that, generations later, a lot of women suffer with what is known as this witch's wound. And a witch is not something bad. They demonize that word. A witch is just a woman who's connected to the elements of this planet, the moon, the cycles, the plants, the herbs, right? And if they were hiding their gifts, or if they were basically persecuted for their gifts, then later on you try to be authentically you with your gifts, with you're here to share with the world, and you have this deep fear of being punished. That has to do with the distortion in the negative mind that is connected many times to what your ancestors went through themselves. And this is where negativity can start to feel like an entity, not because your soul can be stolen from you, or somebody can, or an entity can literally possess you. It's because your soul is untouchable, but because fear loops become self-feeding. So what this means is that the entity, what you would describe it to be, is a distortion in the energy field. It's like a hole. We talked about this last week, where in the podcast episode, so go check it out if you missed it. If there's this hole, you walk into rooms, there's energy there, and it's like the energy in that room impacts that hole, or goes through that hole, penetrates it, and then now you are absorbing all that energy as well. And none of that is you being weak, or I'm just an empath. It's a trauma response, and we talked about that in last week's episode. So if you missed it, go check it out. But when negativity starts feeling like an entity, we understand that they feed this energy feeds on resentment, on blame, on imaginary arguments, on rehearsing conversations that never happen. And every time you rehearse the conversation, your brain believes it's real. So you lose the present moment to a courtroom that's in your head. And that's not discernment. That's captivity. That's us being slaves. So this, of course, goes back to what I was referring to about the brain, because the brain is very much correlated to this hypervigilance and this negative mind distortion of constantly worrying, constantly waiting for something really dangerous to happen. And to understand this, I'm going to put this in very simple terms to give you like a visualization. I use a lot of scientific terminology, but I'm going to give you this visualization so you can better understand how this is functioning every day in your life. Your brain has basically two main teams. Think of it that way. There's like an alarm team, which detects all types of threats. But then there's also like the thinking team, right? And the thinking team, it reasons, it reflects, it creates choice, right? So when your brain senses danger, it gives power to the alarm team. And that, the thinking team, then gets very quiet. And that's why you can't think your way out of stress. You can't talk your way out of trauma. In an alarm, your brain chooses speed over wisdom. So if the alarm is constantly going off, which it is for a cycle breaker, because the nervous system gets hijacked and gets stuck in fight and flight, the brain becomes impacted. Parts of the brain don't function the same way, like the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for emotional regulation. So that means that the alarm is always on. Imagine living in a house where a constant alarm is going off. It would be wild, insane. But that's how most women live when they've experienced trauma and have not healed it. Then they wonder why they can't think. This is why meditation, Kundalini Yoga meditation, is about taking out the garbage so that we don't have this pile up of alarms that have never been turned off. So the thinking team part of the brain gets super quiet, and that's why the alarm looks like tightness in your chest or stomach issues. Feel nauseated. You start to feel like your stomach is hurting, even. The racing thoughts, the spiraling. My God, that is so common. Even the over explaining and the people pleasing and the shutting down part, because it's not with our nervous system, it's not just fight and flight. There's also fawn, which is where we shut down and we can't even reply back to the email, reply back to the text. We can't even say anything because of the fact that the negative mind has gone into complete overdrive. We also are very reactive and we snap very easily. And again, this is not because you're broken, it's because the alarm team took the microphone. The alarm has never been turned off. And for many cycle breakers, I'm not just talking about in this lifetime, generation from generation for generation, which I have a lot of compassion for my ancestors because of the fact that, yes, I remember all of the traumatic experiences that I went through, the recent ancestors, right? But by the same token, through my healing journey, I've also discovered the gifts that my ancestors gave me, and there were a lot of beautiful things that also did occur. But when we think about the generational piece to this, if you grew up with unpredictability, that alarm team got trained to treat normal life like danger. So that becomes a normal setting for your brain and your nervous system. Actually, if you go into peace mode, if you go into like health and wealth mode, that's what's dangerous to your brain, nervous system, and to the negative mind. Wild, right? So we got retrain that. Your brain actually will react in a very interesting way, especially to things like delayed text. Like somebody takes a while to text you back, and then you make it about yourself. You start to take it personal. That's a very overactive negative mind. Or somebody's tone shifts. And this, think about childhood, right? Your brain was developing between the ages of 0 to 7, especially, right? And that's when it's like so programmable. It's like in the stage of like theta, where it's like literally like the hypnotic stage. Whatever they tell you, it becomes impressed into the subconscious mind, whatever you see. So it literally becomes your program. So the thing about childhood is that many times we were at home and then mom or dad got home from work and they were stressed out about work. They were stressed out about their own relationship. Maybe there was fighting. And then you as a child didn't know that it was something to do with life. Because your brain is still developing, you make it about yourself. And this becomes a pattern that moves through with you through adulthood. So then later in life, the tone shifts in your partner, your children, someone around you, your boss, your employee. And what happens? You immediately, your brain reacts because it's scanning for the danger. The other thing about this is even when it comes to being corrected, like a lot of people that have a very overactive negative mind, they see correction as like a personal insult. All of this goes back to what we were talking about last week in the podcast episode of identity and the soul. When you don't know who you are, the negative mind goes on overdrive, and when you're being corrected, you take it personal. And that's horrible, especially for somebody who is running a company, the mother of children. We have to be coachable. All of us do. We all have opportunities to grow. Many people, they don't hire a mentor or a coach because they're truly afraid of being corrected. And that has everything to do with the overactive negative mind and trauma response. Because truly, somebody who is has a good relationship with themselves and who has dealt with the trauma, they hire the coach, they hire the mentor because they want that person to call out their blind spots. We all have blind spots, and we without calling them out, we can't grow. It's like what they say, you cannot change what you're not aware of, right? So it's actually really powerful to have like a mentor, a coach, a teacher who is catching those blind spots for you and helping you correct them so you don't repeat the cycle again. The other thing about this mind, a negative mind overdrive, is also that when you do make a mistake, you feel like life is on fire. And that's the whole thing. Like, we're all gonna make mistakes. I know that as an entrepreneur, like, for example, I've been an entrepreneur since 2005, right? So a lot of the things that I'm creating, they've never been created before. And there are gonna be mistakes. But mistakes to me are, first of all, I don't believe that there's ever a mistake because from the mistakes, that's where I learn the most. That's where I can stop repeating it, right? If it doesn't serve me. But when you don't have a healthy negative mind, you're gonna make it about yourself. You're gonna take it personal. There's gonna be shame. There's gonna be guilt. Why? Well, because you want to be perfect. Why? Well, because since you were a child, that's what was expected of you as well. And all of this that I'm describing, it's hypervigilance, and it is hypervigilance in the brain that is constantly scanning, but all of this is also learned, and this is how it impacts the negative mind. Now, I'll give you some examples or help you better understand it through this example of how this shows up. So, for example, let's say you notice that someone is like super quiet. So then all of a sudden your body is like scanning, your brain is scanning, and you think, "Oh my God, I'm in trouble," or "What's wrong with them?" A lot, a large part of the negative mind overdrive when it comes to being a cycle breaker is that we cannot find happiness and peace if someone around us is basically mad, upset, and maybe not even at us. But let's say your partner or one of your children is having a bad day, they're angry, they're upset, or whatever, then you cannot handle that. And then you start to go down that same spiral as they are. Or you start to think things like, I did something wrong, I'm in trouble. And then what do? You start apologizing. You start to try to fix things right away by explaining. Remember, especially if someone comes to you and they need your support, presence, listening, seeing them as they are, which is as the Christ, that's how we truly help them. But when you have a very overactive negative mind, you don't even see yourself as the Christ. And if you don't see yourself as the Christ, it's going to be difficult to then see others as the Christ and see others as, hey, they're just having a dysregulated moment. It's not who they are. Same thing with you. With an overactive negative mind, it's not who you are, the worrier. It's not your personality. It's just a dysregulated moment, and we can change that. So we're gonna show you how to do that here next. Another example is trying to rest, where you try to rest, you're tired, but your mind gets louder. So what do? You start to clean the house, you start to scroll, you start to overwork. That's a lot of correlation to guilt, which is very much connected to the negative mind. Or, for example, you say things like, I know I'm not going to do that. And what happens? Guilt hits you like you committed a crime. All of this is not intuition, it's just training. That's all that it is. And then we get stuck in these like shame guilt loops that keep the negative mind very distorted. Where guilt is saying, I did something wrong. Shame, I am wrong. And in many family systems, shame and guilt was the control tool. We're going to talk about guilt very thoroughly from A Course in Miracles, Jesus Christ perspective, because it is the most toxic emotion to stay under. Look, you're going to have all types of emotions, but you're not your emotions. Staying in that emotion for long periods of times is what causes the continuous brain impact and nervous system impact, as well as the negative mind distortion. So we're going to break it down so you can better understand what guilt actually is and how to overcome that. Because wait till we talk about the Jesus Christ perspective, why we are actually truly feeling guilty. It's going to shock you. So we're going to get there in a moment, but think of it this way. In family systems, shame was and guilt was a control tool. So your body learned, if I'm not perfect, I lose belonging. Many of our mothers who had a very overactive negative mind, they said, I'm just a worrier. So then they controlled you. They wouldn't let you go out and play. They wouldn't. My mom was definitely a worrier, and she grew up with a lot of depression because first of all, she grew up without her father, who was unalived at a very young age. She was only like 3 years old. And then my mom just had a lot of depression because there was a lot of unexpected deaths that happen in her family lineage, not just my grandfather, but then there was also four different of her brothers, including an aunt of mine that I saw as my best friend. I saw her as my mother. And so my mom, her nervous system was very like hijacked into adrenaline and cortisol because she had so much grief that was stored in her body that she was a constant worrier and she worried about something happening to us. So what she did is she would use control. And I remember as a little girl, she wouldn't let me out and play like a long period of time. Sometimes she would let me out to play, but it was very short, or she had to be watching me, which I don't blame her, she just wanted to protect me. But then as a teenager, I was very rebellious and I just wanted out of my house. And then I met my husband and we got pregnant when I was 17, had our baby at 17. I was pregnant at 16, had him at 17. Been married now for 27 years. We were together for 30 years already. Like it's wild. But so what had happened with me was that I know that my mom, now I know, right? Back then, I saw my mom as my worst enemy because she didn't let me go out. I was not allowed to go to like parties. And if I did go, I was supposed to come home early, which what did that cause? It caused me to sneak out at night and still go to the party. It caused me to rebel in a very big way. And I thank God my husband was not like a cholo or a homie. He was like a good dude, that was very responsible. Because when I got pregnant, it could have been so much worse, right? So that caused her control because of her worry, caused me and her to have a very negative or a not so positive relationship. Now, as an adult, that I've done my own healing journey, I understand why she was doing that, and I don't take it personal anymore because she was not controlling me because she was an evil mom. It was because that was her way of feeling secure with all the adrenaline and cortisol that was moving through her body. And then there was guilt also too, along with that. I mean, I used to get more than straight A's. I was always like a 4.5 GPA, A plus, extra credit, and all of that. And whenever it wasn't like perfect, although I don't can't remember when it wasn't perfect, but whenever I did other things, for example, like I was a very I used my voice a lot. I talked back. I asked questions that she couldn't answer. Then she would make me feel guilty about those things. And again, it wasn't because of the fact that she was mean and evil. It was because that was her mechanism. I remember after school, I was like such a social butterfly, and I would stay and hang out with the friends and talk and stuff like that. So then she would control that and make me feel guilty about doing that so that I would stop doing it. And again, she was just trying to hone me in. She was so worried about something happening to me that that was the only way that she could actually do it. So my body learned then if I'm not perfect, I lose belonging. She's not going to accept me. She's not going to love me, especially because she went through so much grief, growing up. The death of my aunt really impacted me in a big way because not only did I see her as a mom, but nobody in my family really talked about it. When she transitioned, it was just tucked under the rug. And I just saw my mom go into these deep states of depression where it was like there was nothing that I could do, even though I tried. I tried so much. I remember there was this one time where she was making enchiladas when they called her to go to the hospital because my aunt was transitioning. And that day she transitioned, and so she left everything on the stove. And then I started making the enchiladas for her so she could be happy when she got home because I just didn't want to see her sad. And then when she got home, she told me that my aunt transitioned and she didn't eat the enchiladas. And I still remember enchiladas always have a place in my heart. I still like them a lot and make them myself. But before my healing journey, they made me feel really triggered because it always brought back that memory of like, being a child and just wanting your mom to be happy and you trying to do everything possible for that to happen and yet nothing was happening. And so we develop these like mentalities of like, my God, I don't belong, I'm not accepted, and all these things are all done unconsciously. So definitely not here to blame my mom. In fact, I really understand her now, and I have so much compassion for her. But that's exactly why the negative mind overdrive turns into an identity paranoia, where it's not just is this safe, it's also am I safe to be me? And we ask those questions because if our parents are the ones that are supposed to love us unconditionally and they didn't, then oh my God, no one else is going to do that for us, right? And so what we have to start doing is we have to stop feeding this loop of the negative mind. Because if you keep feeding the loop, it's going to grow. And if you don't do anything to stop the loop, then it's going to continue to be a program. Because every time you rehearse blame and you replay arguments and you complain in your head, oh my God, complaining is the most horrible thing for a woman, especially. Complaining actually minimizes the strength and power of your aura, which is your electromagnetic field. So that makes you weak in every single way. It makes you more susceptible to like energy and spiritual warfare and immune disease. Every time a woman complains, that electromagnetic field that protects her, it just starts to become very distorted. So just be conscious of that. Because every time you've done this, you basically hand your attention to something that makes you smaller. So the real question is, if you stop feeding the negativity, who are you? What do you value? Where do you want your attention to live? If you are if you haven't dealt with the chronic stress that and the complex post-traumatic stress of trauma, I mean, you don't even give yourself the space to even ask these bigger questions. And you did not come here in this incarnation to just complain and blame. You came here to be extraordinary. Extraordinary means present, means truthful, means kind, courageous, and willing to be seen. That's a cycle breaker's work. And so, how do we change this? We have this negative mind. No one taught us in school how to actually do this. Is it possible for us to not be a slave to the negative mind? Well, guess what? It 1,000% is possible because we do this through Kundalini Yoga and meditation. Now, today I want to share with you the science of mantra because in Kundalini Yoga we use mantra, which is it's the science of sound. It's not just affirmations using the English language. Every sound in mantra creates a specific chemical process in your body, in your mind, in your spirit. And I want to talk about a specific mantra that's going to support the negative mind and turn all complaining, toxicity of the negativity into positivity. Before we do that, I want to remind you all of the power of mantra and how it works because it's very powerful in the brain and in the nervous system. Mantra creates rhythm, it's a sound frequency, right? And this sound frequency, when repeated, it creates predictable timing, safety signal for your brain. That's how, through frequency and sound, you create new neurons, new neural pathways. There's even this video that I've talked about before where they scan the brain as it's meditating, and you can see these neurons and these neural pathways, they start to like communicate back with each other because that's what trauma does. It stops the communication. So the frequency creates predictable timing, creates safety signals in the body, which change the brain. The other thing about sound and vibration is that steady input that competes with intrusive loops is what stops like the hamster wheel. So think of it like your negative mind that's on overdrive as like a hamster that's moving through the wheel. The mantra is like the wrench that you throw inside the wheel to stop all of that. And it's so amazing because, for example, I did this one mantra, Longe con cars. We still chant that on Mondays inside of my community, but I chanted that mantra for 1,000 days, 1,000 days. And now, when my mind wants to spiral because there's stress, stress will always be there. You stress is not bad. It's staying in stress. So I have stress now from growing the movement, right? I have stress now from what we're building in other countries. I have stress, and it's not bad. It comes with growth. So we're not here to try to avoid stress because it's part of growth. We're here to not stay in states of stress, which turns into chronic stress, which turns into complex post-traumatic stress. And so when I chanted this mantra for 1,000 days, now what happens is that anytime I start to spiral or there's negativity, right, then I instantly like it'll start, and then all of a sudden I'll start hearing the mantra instead. So it just becomes a automatic response. So then it prevents me from reacting, from projecting. When we react, we're gonna 1,000% of the time repeat the pattern. That's what repeats the pattern. When we respond differently, that's what ends the pattern. And mantra allows you to create that pause because it changes the nervous system and it changes the brain. How? Remember we talked about this last week? When you are chanting mantra, you are stimulating specific areas of the upper part palate of your mouth. Up here, upper palate, you have 84 meridian points. Just absolutely amazing. And these 84 meridian points are connected to specific areas of your brain. And then they create a secretion, right? So what you're doing is I want you to imagine yourself as you are a vessel, an instrument of God. That's what Dr. Wayne Dyer says. He was a spiritual teacher who transitioned already, but he said something like, "Don't die with your music in you," right? What does that mean? That you have to harmonize the instrument. You are an instrument of God, the vessel for God, the temple for God, the sanctuary for God. When you chant mantra, you're harmonizing. What is harmonizing too? That's endocrine system balance. That's hormonal balance. You're reducing because you're rebuilding parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, the pineal, the pituitary gland, the amygdala. What you're doing is you are then creating harmony in the secretions that are happening in your body. You're reducing cortisol and adrenaline, and it's still there to be used when there is danger, right? And that's what brings harmony, and that's how you become a vessel, and that's how you do not die with your music in you. So that sound vibration, that steady input, it throws the wrench from those intrusive loops because you are replacing it with these sounds. The other thing about sound is the repetition, chanting mantra. That's how new pathways of neurons are created and strengthened so that your consciousness can use other streets instead of the ones your ancestors have used for a long time of survival, of grief, of trauma, basically. So instead of your mind rehearsing fear, what is it going to do? It's going to rehearse sovereignty. It's going to rehearse present moment awareness. And so today I want to talk specifically about this mantra that we use for the negative mind. It actually is a mantra that reverses negativity into positivity. Now, this mantra, as all mantras, you practice it with reverence, and especially with this one, because it is called the Master Key Mantra, you want to be very conscious and aware of what you are saying after you recite it or after you chant it, because it turns your what you say into it materializes it very, very quickly. And this mantra is known as Ek Onkar Sadguru Prasad. And the meaning of it is Ek Onkar means God and the creation are one. The one creator runs through everything. And then Sadguru Prasad means all is a blessing, a gift from the true Guru, the divine wisdom. And so, what it means is it's a declaration that through the Guru's grace, one realizes the unity of all existence and the presence of the divine in everything. In everything. That is one of the 5 sutras of Kundalini Yoga for this new age of Aquarius that we're stepping into. See God in everyone or don't see God at all. And what this does as a mantra is that it enables this transformation from negative to positive states. So we use it to break through mental blocks, to elevate and expand your consciousness. What happens when you go through trauma is that your perception and consciousness become very narrow. So you can't see the big picture. And through this mantra, you're chanting it and it expands that ability by changing the nervous system and brain, of course, which expands your perception of life, which gives you ability to see the solution, not just the problem. The other thing about this mantra is it's very powerful in enhancing your intuition because of the fact that it works so beautifully on the brain, the pituitary, the prefrontal cortex, so that you can really understand that you are a powerful co-creator and that you can plant the seed of your creations with God, and then you don't have to keep moving the dirt to see if it's time for you to harvest. That's what's the doubt, right? That's what stops the plant from sprouting from you being able to harvest. And it is considered like a magic mantra because its effect can manifest very quickly because it clears paths and aligns you with the infinite, with God, with your soul. So with this mantra, I just highly suggest you treat it with respect because it amplifies thoughts and words. So maintain elevated positive intentions when you chant it. But it's great for you if you've especially been spiraling so that you can even just say it 3 times. You can even set a clear intention before meditating to connect with the divine or to find that inner peace because you can also chant this mantra for 11 minutes. Just simply sitting in easy pose. Ek Onkar Sadguru Prasad. There are several musical tracks that you can find on Spotify that have it. I have a lot of favorite ones that you can actually just listen to as well and then move into actual chanting. It is going to be much more powerful for you to chant it But you can also use it as a tool very quickly, where if you're not doing it for 11 minutes, which you want to do 11 minutes for 40 days, then you can say it 3 times every time you've experienced something that is really, really negative, or you've gone through the spiral of negative thoughts. Because ultimately, what this mantra does is Ek Onkar Sat Gur Prasad. So I'm going to spell it so you all can find it. And I'll put it here below in the chat or in the description. EKONGKARSATGURPRASAD. Ekonkar Satguru Prasad. Ekonkar Satguru Prasad. Remember, whatever you repeat with repetition, it's going to get easier for you to learn it and repeat it, but your soul knows these things. But we don't, what we want to stop repeating is the fear patterns, the guilt patterns, because those are the default roads that create an overactive negative mind. This is why we use japji, repetition, in Kundalini Yoga. It's much more powerful for you to practice one mantra, one meditation for 40 days than you doing 18 different ones at the same time. Mantra is building the new road and it requires repetition. Most roads are not built in one time. Although I can tell you and assure you that there are some experiences that I've had where it was one meditation that changed my entire life. So that can absolutely happen to you as well. So now that we've actually named the core problem from a Kundalini Yoga therapy perspective, right? We looked at the negative mind. We looked at it as a protector that's designed to keep you safe, that gets distorted by trauma, that starts scanning everything as danger. Now, let's look at it from a spiritual perspective, because here's what often keeps that distortion locked in place. And what I'm referring to is guilt. Because guilt doesn't just make you feel bad, it literally changes how you see yourself and how you see others. And when perception is distorted, guidance gets distorted. So now let's move into A Course in Miracles, Jesus Christ correction. And we're going to get very precise about what guilt actually is, because it is so connected to the overactive negative mind. In A Course in Miracles, what Jesus Christ, and there's so much teachings in A Course in Miracles on guilt, because it is literally the number one emotion that is the most toxic. You would think it'd be like fear, you would think it'd be like anger and rage. It's actually guilt. And the reason why we actually are guilty is going to surprise you. But guilt, if you think about it, is not, I made a mistake and I want to repair it, right? There's a very specific teaching from A Course in Miracles about guilt and what it is. Conventionally, I think we don't necessarily understand it. And the reason why we don't understand it is because of all the guilt that we carry. In this world, especially, this world is created so that you can actually feel guilty. That's just the way it is. And the number one, well, the reason that they do that is because guilt is a powerful way to actually control you. If you think about all the different ways guilt has been used to control you, I want to take you back to like even like the pandemic. They tried to make you feel guilty if you didn't take the V, or religion. That's like the number one thing that they use to control you, guilt. And what is the story that they tell you? That you are basically inherit sinner, and they make you feel guilty because look what you did to Jesus Christ. I'm like, we didn't do that to Jesus Christ. You all did that to Jesus Christ. And ultimately, Jesus Christ was not here to teach us about the crucifixion. He was here to teach us about the resurrection. So nothing went wrong with Jesus Christ. That's why we're still talking about him, because of the fact that he did not suffer. He actually learned and his purpose, walked through his purpose with grace, and didn't even look back. But from a conventional setting, we typically understand guilt as the state or status of someone who has broken some kind of legal code, right? An ethical code or the law of God. So we'll call this the state of guilt. And this is important because we're going to look at the difference between the state of guilt versus like guiltlessness. So guilt in a conventional setting is an inner experience of the state of guilt, a feeling which says you are bad because you sinned. That's the feeling of guilt. Now, Jesus, in A Course in Miracles perspective, puts this in a completely different way. Guilt is the emotional experience of the belief that A, because you committed a sin, you have made yourself into a bad person, and C, you deserve punishment and death. So, A, you believe that because you committed a sin, B, you have made yourself into a bad person, and C, you deserve punishment and death. So, guilt's ultimate basis is a belief and belief that we attacked and separated from God. That's the worst part of the guilt. We believe that we are able to be separate from God. There's so many other things that you think you feel guilty about, but they've been telling you religion, society, God is in the church, God is in the heaven, sky somewhere, and you accepted that. And ultimately, that's actually why you feel the guiltiest. Isn't that crazy? In conventional setting, the inner verdict of guilt says things like, I'm bad. I ruined everything. I deserve punishment. I have to suffer to be worthy. And here's the key distinction that changes everything. There's actually a difference between the state of guilt and the feeling of guilt. Why? Well, because the state of guilt means I truly committed a real offense. I am truly guilty. The feeling of guilt is the emotional experience that comes when you believe you're in that state. So, of Course in Miracles, Jesus says in a very radical way, you are not truly in a state of guilt. State of guilt means I truly committed a real offense. I am truly guilty. Jesus says you're not in a state of guilt because you cannot actually separate from God. You cannot destroy your innocence. You cannot remake yourself into something unworthy, regardless of what has happened to you or whatever you did. So guilt is not evidence. It's a signal that perception is distorted. That's what guilt is. You're in the state of guilt. You're in the feeling of guilt, excuse me, not the state of guilt. The feeling of guilt being the emotional experience that comes when you believe you're in that. You're not in the state of guilt. You are in the feeling of guilt because there's no way that you can remake yourself into something unworthy. Now, and the reason why we think that is because religious programming has made us believe in a false God, a God that sits on a chair with his hands crossed all day, judging us. You did that bad, you did that good. And then you go through the purgatory in your last breath, and God says, no, you go to hell, you go to heaven. That's not the true God. God is an all loving God. God, if you were to accept how God sees you, you would probably have a psychic shock because of the fact that God sees you with so much love. Imagine, I mean, a lot of parents that haven't gone through trauma or even those that have, how do you see your kids? You know, you love them unconditionally. You want to do everything for them and assist them. So God wanted to express herself and she incarnated as you, or she incarnated through you, through your soul. You're not God, but God did author you. And we're not separate from God as much as religion has told us. Why did religion tell us that we're separate from God? Because then we could give our power to the church, to all these false gods, all these people that have basically said, I'm going to usurp God's power. Remember, we talked about the authority problem in the last podcast episode? So, because you cannot actually separate from God, you cannot even destroy your innocence. Nothing you do. You cannot remake yourself into something unworthy. So guilt is not evidence. It's just a signal that the perception is distorted. And that's what A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy is. It's about changing your perception. You might not be able to go change what happened, but you absolutely can change your perception about what happened because if you change your perception about what happened, you change the meaning that you're giving to that experience, which changes your entire life. And so this is why guilt feels so sticky. There's a continuum. from this false guiltlessness to true guiltlessness. And here's what this means in real life. According to Jesus in A Course in Miracles, this is false guiltlessness is actually denial. So this is when someone attacks, justifies it, and then calls himself innocent. Jesus in A Course in Miracles calls this the face of innocence. It looks clean on the surface, but guilt stays buried underneath. Then there's also what is known as neurotic guilt. This is when guilt becomes a ritual. I feel bad, I apologize, and then I repeat the same pattern. Jesus in the Course says that this doesn't heal anyone. It's an ego, which is your program, device to atone without actually changing. And then there's what is known as healthy guilt feelings. This is the very useful middle step. This is where guilt becomes a signal that you want to act with more love. So what happens? You repair, you grow, you stop repeating the behavior. And Jesus says that this has a lot of merit. It's part of healing. So you see how your emotions are not the problem? It's just a signal of what is happening in this moment in time and space, not who you are. So guilt serves a purpose. It becomes a signal, perhaps, that you want to act with more love, that you want to repair, that you want to grow, that you want to stop repeating the behavior. But most of us, when we feel guilty, there's so much shame attached to that guilt that then we can't move forward. We can't see the correction. We can't understand that this is the part of healing, that it has merit, that our awareness of the guilt can create change within us. But because our nervous system becomes hijacked and our negative mind goes on overdrive, we get stuck in the guilt. We don't know how to change and correct. And even if we try to correct and change, we still feel horrible about ourselves. And then Jesus Christ takes us even deeper inside of Course in Miracles because Jesus Christ talks about this deeper correction that has to happen of undoing the error at the level of the mind. And in Kundalini Yoga therapy, that would be at the level of the negative mind, where you're not just changing behavior, you're changing the entire thought system underneath the behavior. And this is where atonement comes in. Atonement is very much talked about inside A Course in Miracles from Jesus Christ's perspective because he says you're here to atone, do bigger things than he has done. And this is where atonement comes in because only what is loving is true. The only thing that is true in this world is love. That's the only thing. Everything else is an illusion. And you're here to master love. How do you master love? By rebuilding your nervous system and brain, a healthy negative mind, so you have awareness. And so that every time you know you're not in a consciousness of love, you can be willing to see it through the eyes of love, see it through the eyes of God. But most of us don't even have the awareness. We don't have the nervous system capacity to become aware of our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So 95% of the day, we just go spiraling under the same behaviors. And this is why we delay our atonement. Guess what? You are here to do the same thing that Jesus Christ did. It might take you a few lifetimes, but you're here to do the exact same thing. To understand that only what is loving is true. And your mind is restored then by releasing the interpretation that says you are guilty and you deserve punishment. And remember, the number one thing we feel guilty about is thinking that we could even separate from God. We think we're guilty about, especially women, mother. I'm not a good enough mother. I'm not a good enough wife. I'm not a good enough, all these things, right? In the end, if you knew that you were not separate from God, and this is caused through trauma too, you wouldn't feel guilty about any of those things. You would know that you are a vessel for God and that God moves through you and you would surrender to God. So true guiltlessness is not denial. It's not neurotic guilt. It's clarity. I am as God created me. I am innocent as God created me. We have to change our perception of who we think God is. Because that's the whole thing. The reason why we don't bring things to God is because we think God is a mean father who talks shit all day and who's only going to punish us. Imagine if your parents were like that, you would never go to them with any problem. right? You just figure it out on your own. That's what we do in this incarnation because we've been told that we separated from God and we believe it. And then we're told that God is punishing us and judging us. We're not going to believe that we are innocent as God created us. And we're definitely not going to have a relationship with God. And we're definitely not going to take our challenges to God. And God wants you to bring everything to God. Even you trying to find a taxi, even you trying to find a jacket, even you, God wants to be part of it all. And when we accept that we are as God created us, guess what? The negative mind no longer needs guilt to function. Now, let's bring this back to identity. Guilt doesn't just say you made a mistake, guilt says that you are the mistake. And that's why guilt hijacks discernment. Now, remember, we're looking at it from a Kundalini Yoga perspective. Guilt hijacks the negative mind and turns your protector into a prosecutor, into paranoia, right? So instead of that's unsafe, choose differently, you get you're bad, you're wrong, you ruin everything. That's not protection. That is self attack, wearing the costume of spirituality. So guilt versus God, very different because guilt is urgent, loud, punishing, humiliating, identity based, and I am bad, collapses you, it makes you hide, it makes you wear a mask, it makes you perform. Where God's guidance, completely different. Calm, clear, firm, without cruelty, specific, do this, not you are this. It restores dignity, it increases peace and self respect. So guilt says, suffer, then you're going to be worthy. That's exactly where religion programmed our ancestors to be. That literally, our ancestors were, many of them that were especially devout Christians and Catholics, religion taught them that suffering was spiritual. Again, false God. So what did they become? Martyrs. And their entire life was about suffering. And that's what guilt says. Suffer, then you're going to be worthy. God says the complete opposite. Return to peace. Return to your temple. Return to the sanctuary. Then you're going to see clearly. Same life, two very different authorities. And so, what ultimately releases us from guilt is something that a lot of cycle breakers might be triggered by. And we're going to do a whole other episode on just this because what I'm referring to is the F word, forgiveness. And the thing about forgiveness is that it's not just a spiritual process, it's also biophysical. Because if you have an overactive negative mind, forgiveness, even hearing that word, you're going to be triggered. Why? Because remember, an overactive negative mind, biophysically, what that means is a nervous system that's hijacked by trauma, chronic stress, constantly secreting adrenaline and cortisol, a brain that is hypervigilant because of the trauma that is constantly worried. So if there is World War III going on inside of your body, forgiveness is not something that you even would consider because forgiveness, the way it's developed is you have to develop a nervous system capacity vitality. Remember, your emotions, our energy and motion, they eat up your energy unconsciously if you're running a program 95% of your day. So that's why you don't even have vitality enough to confront and to face these things, like the process of forgiveness. Now, from A Course in Miracles perspective, Jesus Christ says that forgiveness is not saying what happened was okay. Forgiveness is releasing the distortion that is interpreting what happened, changing the perception. Typically, when we look at a situation that was traumatic, what happens? We say, that happened. This person did that to me because of I'm unworthy. I deserved it. Where was God? We make it about ourselves. When a traumatic experience happens to you and someone else has hurt you, it's not about you as much as we want to make it about ourselves. That person did that because of their pain, their unconsciousness. That's why they did that. So we have to change that perception and meaning we're giving to that. Now, as it relates to guilt, think about it. The biggest shift in perception we have to make is that even through that traumatic experience, God was there. I've been thinking about soul purpose, and we've been talking a lot about this in my community, the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary, because this month we're working on soul body beyond false identities inside of the sanctuary, where we train sovereignty for first time generational cycle breakers. And I really received this aha moment from Tuesday's A Course in Miracles class with Lizzie. She teaches our Tuesday classes, and every month they're focused on a generational healing theme, along with one of the bodies that we're working through in Kundalini Yoga. And we're talking about soul purpose. And ultimately, what I realized through what she was sharing was the fact that our soul actually incarnated to simply be freed through the Judas, through the person that has hurt you the most, through being able to forgive them. Just the way Jesus Christ said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." Like, we try to glamorize our life purpose, but when you do that, when you are able to forgive the person who has hurt you the most, guess what happens? It's not that you're gonna like go start a nonprofit that now you teach others how to do the same thing, although you might want to do that, but it's just in the way you live your life. If you live your life in a way where I have faith in you, God, I love you, God, I know you live within me, even after all the bullshit you went through, after all the traumatic things you went through, my God, you're giving permission for others to do the same. And we all incarnate as souls into these bodies as patients, like Jesus says in A Course in Miracles, meaning there's going to be trauma here. There's going to be the illusion of separation. But when you restore that through forgiveness, you actually then give others permission to live in sovereignty themselves. It's not even what you say, it's how you carry yourself, how you live your life. So forgiveness is never about it was okay. It's about releasing that distortion, that perception, because guilt distorts the perception, and perception creates your experiences in life. So when you actually do the work to release the guilt through the spiritual psychotherapy of A Course in Miracles, which we do every Tuesday inside of our community, and through the Kundalini Yoga meditations, which changes the brain and the nervous system, your perception is going to change. It's inevitable. That's why we have to take a holistic approach for generational healing, body, mind, and spirit. And guess what happens when guilt is released? The perception not only clears, but then what happens when the perception clears? Guidance becomes simple again. Your own inner guidance, whether you're talking about your soul, whether you're talking about God, whether you're talking about the Holy Spirit. So you're not broken. There's a biophysical, biological process, and then there's a spiritual process so that you can have a very, very healthy negative mind that uses discernment, that actually protects you, that shows you the red flags without you being afraid, without you feeling guilty about saying no or moving through life in your own frequency, not when someone else has dictated from you. Now, I will say that with this type of approach of healing, there's a certain mindset that is required because sovereignty requires this mindset that is very specific and very different than any mindset that I've experienced in any other type of journey. What I'm talking about is the mindset that you're gonna need is my negative mind is not my enemy. Even if you already are aware that you have a very overreactive negative mind, it's still not your enemy. It's ultimately your protector. And it can be healed and it can be rewired. The other thing that has to shift in the mindset is that you have to understand that your alarm is not your intuition. You have to understand that even if it's God telling you you have to leave that relationship or that job, it's not going to come as an alarm. It's going to come in a very neutral state. And so your alarm is not your intuition is a very important part of the mindset that has to shift. The other thing is guilt is not guidance. And you're not guilty. You have feelings of guilt, right? So whenever you feel guilty about something, that's not your soul or God trying to guide you to do something. So this is where you gotta pause. You also have to understand that peace becomes the signal that changes the perception. And you have to rebuild peace back into the body. Peace is not all love and light. You have to rebuild it through the nervous system, through the brain, through the activation of the negative mind. You also don't have to punish yourself to be worthy of God. We have to change our mindset and perception of who we think God is. And for me, A Course in Miracles Spiritual Psychotherapy, through the teachings of Jesus Christ in there, that's what helped me heal the relationship with myself, which healed the relationship with God, which healed the relationship with everyone around me. It is the core journey that I took to release guilt and to be able to really see myself as God sees me. Now, Cycle Breaker's identity is built around this because when protection learns to actually rest, like meaning you're not always in danger, guilt no longer becomes your authority. And then guess what happens? Your soul leads. Your soul is able to leave when you take out the garbage from the mind. If you're not taking out the garbage, your soul is not going to lead. It's the programming that's leading. And so today in this podcast episode where we named were the 10 bodies, but we looked specifically at the negative mind and we looked at the three aspects of the mind. We also looked at how a healthy negative mind protects you and how trauma distorts it into scanning and hypervigilance. We also looked at some interesting science of why your intuition disappears under stress and how negativity becomes a self-feeding loop that steals the present moment. And we especially looked at the A Course in Miracles Jesus Christ correction, guilt as a feeling versus the state of who you are, and then the path from false guiltlessness to true guiltlessness, plus the very practical tests of guilt versus God and what forgiveness actually means. So if you yourself, sovereign sister, are tired of living like you're about to get in trouble, if you want clarity that doesn't collapse under stress and you want to use the power of your intuition, introspection, if you're ready to stop treating guilt like God, this is the sovereignty that we train inside the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary, not as a theory, as a living shift in your mind, body, and spirit, in your nervous system, in your brain, which restores your Saibong, your soul sovereign identity, so that you stop surviving your life and you start being led from peace. So to find out more about becoming a member of the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary, click on the link below in the description. And of course, let me know how this podcast resonated for you in the comments below. I'd love to find out what your experiences have been, not only with the negative mind, but with guilt, which is what causes so many cycle breakers to stay in these loops of generational trauma and then pass them down to the next generation. All the resources are listed below. I'd like to thank you for being here. I'd like to thank you also for sharing this podcast episode, hitting the like button, dropping any comment below helps so much in growing our movement of first-time generational cycle breakers like you and I. I thank you for you, and I'm looking forward very much to our next episode of the Sovereign Sisterhood Movement podcast, where we're going to be looking next at the positive mind. I'll see you in the next episode. So now.